Great, so welcome. We have a very simple topic with very easy answers, again. Now, 15 years ago I was teaching a course at Stanford in the International Relations and International Policy Studies graduate program. The week that we spent on international relations in Japan and then geopolitics, it wasn't that interesting to make it, and it was kind of hard to make exciting. This is 15 plus years ago. Right now, the topic is terrifying. So if we just do a quick exercise here, what the winter quarter looked like, right? It starts in January, goes through the end of March. It started with the US-Venezuela action, right? Then partway through the quarter, then AIPA, which was the basis of the tariffs, was ruled by Supreme Court to be unconstitutional. So what were we doing for this past 10 months? And then Iran started just as spring break, and then the course ended, right? I mean, this is a very different world from when we were students in the late 90s at university and during much of the time that you spent running a university. So basically, the state of play for where US-Japan alliance is and which directions it can head, discussions like this are more important than ever. Because, I mean, if you think about what is an alliance, well, at its core, one way to think about an alliance is lots of things around the world can change, but you want to keep the core relationship fairly intact in a way that's flexible but stay close, right? So what is the US-Japan alliance? And what kinds of situations can it be resilient to? So a quick state of play for how I see it, right? We have the Prime Minister Takaichi, who won a record-breaking lower house election in February. The first thing she did was to commit to a strong Japan-US relationship. When she came to power initially as Prime Minister, first thing she did was to commit to a strong Japan-US relationship. Security-wise, right, Japan is dependent on the US for its security umbrella and nuclear security. Okay, and then at the same time, this administration has been doing a shakedown economically of Japan. This is a tough position to be in. Then economically, Japan has been sandwiched between its biggest trading partner, the US, and the second biggest trading partner, China, which, of course, as soon as Prime Minister Takaichi became Prime Minister, relations went negatively pretty quickly. And so rare earths and things like this, where supply chain constraints can be very real. And so we have the security situation, we have the economic context, and then on top of that, we have the Takaichi's domestic political considerations, where if you look all across the world, where President Trump is not very popular, leaders who have aligned with President Trump have tended to have political damage. Their popularity goes down. And places that stand up have, in large part, done fairly well for the leaders who stand up. And so we saw, say, what happened in Canada. And we also saw what happened in Hungary, and there are many other cases. So there's some real political dilemmas for Prime Minister Takaichi in ordinary circumstances, but yet Japan is constrained because its military is constrained, and you have the alliance that backs this up. So, as I say, a very simple situation, right? And then the economics of the Hormuz Strait, it's not just oil, it's all the plastics, right? Oil-derived things, naphtha. Supply chains are about to stop in many different ways. It's a looming crisis right there, and we'll probably hear more about this in subsequent panels. So that's how I see the state of play. It's kind of grim, but here are some great experts. And so first, let's do a first round of what do you see the state of play as? What are some options for Japan? Where do you see the US-Japan relationship that could be most productive? We'll start with Suzanne. We'll go alphabetically here.
Thank you for having me. So I think everything you described, Kenji, is true, and it's a very chaotic, we heard about that in the first session as well, time for us. But I would say that while on the surface it's very turbulent, I would still frame things as a strong strategic convergence between the U.S. and Japan. And as I was thinking about this panel and I was thinking about what Japan's doing, I feel like Japan is doing a lot, is becoming much more active on its national security. And I feel that, to the extent it's my place to say it, Japan seems to be doing the right things for the right reasons. And they're making a very rational strategic assessment of their security environment and taking actions that make sense from that perspective. So this alignment, I think, is really, really important. But I think what we need to look for is even deeper integration. And when I think about what's kind of changed in the relationship, I've been looking at the alliance as an alliance manager for decades. And what's really, really changed, I think, is that in a new way in the last decade or so, perhaps, but especially currently, when we talk about security, we're talking about economic and technology strengths of our countries as well. And that's really different. A while ago, we used to keep the two pillars of the U.S.-Japan alliance quite separate. But now I think everybody understands that the strength of our deterrence and the strength of the alliance actually rests on this economic and technological elements. So I think those are some of the areas that are going to be really, really important. And then I just want to add that, as we think about the alliance and the very important parts of defense and national security, that's the hardware of the relationship. But what hasn't changed is the foundation of the alliance is really the people-to-people connections. What I think is really able to absorb turbulence in the U.S.-Japan relationship is the fact that we have so many common strategic objectives. But we have to really always work on that and making sure that we are keeping that foundation is strong, because fundamentally we're democracies and people need to be able to support the U.S.-Japan alliance. And so that's why we need to be constantly thinking about investing in the next generation, building business connections, and strengthening those people-to-people connections. And I guess just, one other thing that I would add is when I think about, or two things I would say that we need to be on a path thinking about in the U.S.-Japan relationship is always thinking about how can we increase interoperability. We can dial up or we can dial down how much we want to cooperate with each other going forward, but we always have to have that option. So we need to be building capabilities that are interoperable. And then the other thing I'll say from my experience in looking at the alliance is we always need to keep in mind how do we keep the U.S. presence in Japan, military presence, defense presence, and stable. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of investment from both sides of the government. And, that means dealing with domestic issues as well as bilateral issues. But to me, the sort of most important thing is stable presence of the U.S. as the kind of the cornerstone of the alliance.
Thank you. Let's turn to Marco.
I would say you're seeing the birth of a new world order because the world order post-World War II had America providing to the world security, freedom of motion in all the seas, facilitating global trade. And what you're seeing now in the current administration is they're calling out and saying, is that still good for America? Because in reality, a global order like that only goes and sustains as long as the person who's sustaining it views that it's still in their interest. And so the U.S. is made up of more than one administration and one president. This administration will be known for sort of calling out the question, hey, does that still make sense? When you think about Japan, though, part of what you're seeing is the main stage is the Pacific theater. And part of why you see a more robust challenge to Europe is saying, we, America, need to be attending more of our attention in the Pacific theater. We can't afford to be having that hanging overhead of too much reliance on us in the European theater. So I think you're seeing sort of an alliance audit going on in the minds of some American leaders saying, is this still fit for purpose now? The good news for Japan is your main stage, and you're a very robust security partner, economic partner, technological partner, and you're stepping up to more investment in defense, closer alignment on technology, even more interoperability economically. This is all in the backdrop of saying, okay, what kind of alliance system do we need? What kind of world order we need? For better or for worse, we are in a systems competition. And in digital things which are increasingly driving the economy, all things digital consolidate. They'd consolidate into one if there wasn't strategic competition going on. They're largely going to just consolidate into two spheres. And so I would agree with everything you said except for one about the interoperability. It has to be always forward, ever forward. We need to figure out how do we wind even closer together in the AI stack that we're working on together, and the promoting of our joint vision of technology around the world, because the world will either be wired to empower citizens by US, Japan, and friends, or to control citizens. We need to be working together in a systems level, technological, economic, military. They all need to be tied together. They're all really fused together in this new world. And that's where I see the current state of play and evolution of where we're going with the US-Japan alliance.
Oh, thank you. Maybe we'll turn to Matt and then Kono-san after that.
Great. Well, thank you for putting this together. It's an excellent question. And when I think about how we think about this new stage of the US-Japan alliance, I think back to 3 different visits I took to Japan, which reflect 3 very different places. The first was in the fall of 2010. I was there with President Obama. It was at the very end of a 10-day trip. We had been to India. We had been in Korea for the G7, had a very series of very difficult trade negotiations around the U.S.-Korean Free Trade Agreement. And the president ended his trip in Japan for a very clear reason. That was a cornerstone of what a U.S. strategy was to move away from thinking about the Middle East until really moving towards Asia. And that Asia strategy was very much grounded in the U.S.-Japan defense alliance. It was not a mistake. It was India looking towards the future, Korea, and then Japan. And the biggest tensions we had were largely over fairly familiar economic competition, which now seem much easier. The second part that began as a turning point is I was in Japan in February 2016. And the day I was there was right after a seminal event in American domestic politics, our Super Tuesday primaries. And this is when Donald Trump was running. And I very confidently, like a lot of other Republicans and Democrats on this trip, as a bipartisan trip, said, watch it closely because Donald Trump will not be going much further. Well, that was clearly a brilliant assessment that I had to our Japanese colleagues. But it was the sense even then that something was changing. And you saw the beginnings of an earthquake. And the 2 things that struck out at me is despite the huge amount of investment we had tried to make in the Obama White House, is if you looked at who was trusted by the Japanese, China was surprisingly rising in trust compared to the United States. And there was some sense that the alliance that had endured for so long that you both eloquently talk about was beginning to change in some way. So there's dramatic changes in U.S. domestic politics, and started to see changes in Japan. The conversations we were having in Japan were very much what means for the future of the Japanese military budget, what means for Japan to see itself differently in an increasingly complicated world. But it was a tipping point. And then the third point, which I think takes us to where we are now, is I was in Japan for 2 weeks in November and December 2024. And the purpose that brought me there is there was a cybersecurity company called Nozomi Networks that helps defend companies against some of the most difficult cyber attacks that you face. These are when largely state actors attack what's called operational technology networks. So those are your electricity grids, those are your dams, those are your hospitals, those are your buildings. These are things not like your iPhones, the things that make our infrastructure work. And it was interesting because Japan was facing a huge amount of attacks and concern. And Mitsubishi, the CEO of Melco, was there, along with the CEO of this American company, a few others. And it was to talk about a partnership. And what happened in September of this year, there was actually an announcement. Mitsubishi had invested in this American company, and Mitsubishi acquired this company. And if you think about it, when there's a Japanese seminal company that is thinking how to defend its most important assets from the biggest threats we have right now, to buy an American company, the first software company, probably the biggest software company Melco had ever purchased, that's a really big step. And so where I take away is the future of this alliance, I think it's first strong, but second, we need to think about it a different way. And what I've seen in the decade in finance I've been since serving in the Defense Department and in the White House is it really is this new form of financial and business and technical diplomacy which is driving so much of this. So despite the issues that we have from what President Trump has said with his Japanese counterparts, or even frankly, what some of the same pressures we faced even with President President Biden, sort of convinced the Japanese that the United States alliance remains strong despite a lot of other distraction places in the world. It really is this area that despite what's happening there's an undercurrent of something happening that's quite powerful. And seeing what the private sector is doing to make some of these alliances even strong, that's what really is deepening the connections. And I think we've seen it in cybersecurity. We're seeing it in defense technology. We're seeing it in AI. So I think I have a fair amount of concern about what's happening at the headline level. But I think what all of us in this room should be thinking about is what is behind the headlines. And I think what is behind the headlines are some of these opportunities that I saw over a year ago on my third visit to Japan.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, let's turn it over to Kono-san. Thank you for joining from Tokyo.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, I guess. Yes, it used to be like Dr. Shida said, it used to be US-Japan. Well, we say, yes, we have nuclear umbrella of United States. We have US-Japan Security Treaty. That's end of discussion. It used to be like that. I think it started changing under Obama administration. Well, I think Obama always chickened out. I think you can say that. He chickened out in Syria. He chickened out in South China Sea. So he ceased to be a policeman in the world. And I think that's when this relationship started changing. We should have increased our defense spending much earlier. We should have started discussion on our Constitution, especially Article 9. We should have considered not Plan B, but Plan A plus then, but we didn't do that, and we are paying high price right now. Right now, when you speak to Admiral or General of Indo-Pacific or US forces in Japan, they will tell you the military-to-military relationship between US forces and self-defense forces probably at the best in the history. But they will always add, what about Washington and Tokyo, the political relationship? It's very questionable. In Europe, you have, 27 countries in EU and 32 in NATO. So if US move out of Europe, they could think about Plan B. It's probably not ideal, but Europe could survive without United States. But if you look at the East Asia, here we are living in island country, and we have Republic of Korea, which is sitting next to North Korea. And there's Philippines, but we are separated by the sea, and Australia a bit far away. So in East Asia, we don't have Plan B. We have to have Plan A plus or Plan A plus plus. So we're in a very difficult situation. And unlike Europe, East Asia cannot survive without the United States. That's a very sad fact. So Plan A plus, we are now having NATO ambassadors visiting Tokyo. After Ukraine, we are hoping NATO would change itself from regional institution to global institution to defend the common values. Years ago, there was a talk of having NATO office in Tokyo. At the last minute, Macron opposed to the idea. It didn't go through. So we are hoping we're gonna go through the same process and getting NATO office in Tokyo. And hopefully, North Atlantic Treaty Organization would change into North Atlantic and the Pacific Treaty Organization, NAFTA. And Japan, one day we would change Article 9 of our Constitution and try to be part of a collective defense. And that's something we need to be thinking about. That is Plan A plus. And then another plus would be changing United Nations. United Nations today, we have three villains: China, Russia, and the United States. They are using veto in the Security Council, and the United Nations is paralyzed. So I think we should be adapting new UN Charter and moving into a new era of the United Nations where no one can use veto power. And we should have some kind of police power among the middle power and the global south. That would be another plus. So Japan need to be thinking about moving from Plan A to Plan A plus plus. But politically, either way is very difficult. So Takaichi government has decided to just hang on to the President Trump for next 3 years. Some Middle Eastern country are asking, Japan to mediate the situation. But I think we are just trying to hang on to Trump administration, and hopefully things would settle down before we run out of reserve oil. So that's the sad story of Japan right now.
Thank you so much. And yeah, things are looking grim, but we're going to also look into very optimistic scenarios as much as realistically possible. We're going to work hard. So I have a couple questions, because some of the big themes that came out: economic relations, the fabric is dense, they're stronger, people-to-people connections are good. Japan does seriously need to think about Plan A++ and NAFTA, things like this. So I'm wondering, can we delve one step further into what economic relations or technology relations with US-Japan could look like that can strengthen the alliance? Because right now for technology, since this G1 is also about AI, there's two forces at work here simultaneously going in opposite directions. The big foundation models are from here. Japan is a user of those. But a lot of the deployment that can happen in Japan can't happen without the foundation models here. But there will be a backlash saying, look, we need more sort of national security, national economic security considerations to do more things economically within Japan, self-reliance, because at the high level things are unpredictable. But yet the fabric of economic relations is just getting stronger and stronger. And so how should we think about this? What are some signs that we can look at? And I'd just like to open this out to anybody who wants to answer any part of that in any order.
I can start. I think, as I want to be optimistic and forward-looking here, which I think there's a lot to be. One big opportunity, I think, is this new intersection of technology and national security, which is one interesting use case of AI that hasn't gotten as much attention. So this idea, let's talk about defense. We talked about the Strait of Hormuz, the availability of oil. We're in an increasingly dangerous world, and how do we adapt to equip us to defend ourselves? There's a huge opportunity for the US-Japan alliance in that way. So the example is autonomy on the battlefield, autonomous vehicles, autonomous aircraft, and there are two large US defense technology companies. One's called Anduril, the other's called Shield.ai. Anduril is about a $60 billion company. Shield is about a $10 billion company, both very significant. And both of them have recently announced partnerships with Japan. Anduril, who's created by the founder of Oculus, opened up an office in Japan in December of this past year. Shield has also signed a manufacturing partnership. And two big things that I think can undergird this is the manufacturing capability of Japan is always significant. That is an area that can be used, and both these companies have done that. And then second of all, the Japanese government has become a much better customer of new technologies than the United States government. Or even, frankly, a lot of the NATO governments. You know, with the $58 billion defense budget in Japan, the 14th time in a row, it has increased. There are huge opportunities there. And the reason why it is, I think, easier to do this than in other countries, there is obviously the treaty alliance between the United States and Japan. So it's a strong area we can build on. So as I think about ways we can continue to work on, which is not receiving a lot of attention, this is something we can significantly build on.
I just want to build on that because, spend some time on that same interest of the national security and the defense tech intersection. And it's true, there's so much going on with Japan and Japan as a potential customer, but I would say that there's like a lot of room left for being able to operationalize the ability for dual use technology to be reaching Japanese customers. And I think we're still in kind of early stages. And so I think that's an area that I understand G1's about taking action, and I think that's an area that could really benefit from thinking through some of those steps. So the Nozomi acquisition by Mitsubishi Electric is a great story, and we need to see more of those examples of what are those pathways for non-traditional technologies and defense technologies and even startups to get their technology accepted by Japanese corporations, and then also then finding those government use cases. But I will say one thing that we find really fascinating, and we look at a lot of defense startups that are thinking about Japan, and the reason they're thinking about Japan is from the very beginning, as they're designing their companies, they're thinking about what are the U.S. national security needs, and those are very often centered on the Indo-Pacific challenge. And so from the very beginning, their technologies are already extremely optimized for a Japan use case for the self-defense forces or Japanese Coast Guard or police and so forth. So there's a very, very strong alliance, and companies are keen to go to Japan even earlier in their growth because of that natural alignment. So I think it's an exciting area.
Well, I would just say, why would not people be optimistic? I think the A++ plan is really the way the Japanese are stepping up in terms of their military capabilities and integrating them more completely. If you look at some of the interoperability at the security level for the ability to act together, you're going up. And that's including with the military cases that we just talked about. But, we let them buy, not only let them buy one of our most sensitive technology companies, that's in a sense of how tight the relationship is. And yes, we are moving in that direction of more autonomous military uses. But that only makes the link between military, economic, and technology closer. Because what do you need for those autonomous systems to work? You need artificial intelligence. What do you need for artificial intelligence to work? You need energy, and you need to have the best systems. We are together, and to your point about wanting to have autonomy in your technologies, the biggest risk we face between U.S. and Japan is a fragmentation of the Western system. And if we're having everybody have a Japanese AI system, European system, Australian system, and American system, fragmenting down, when China and friends are all one system, our systems all lose. So we need to figure out how can we give agency, not just to Japan, but to other countries. And that's where it's vital that we work more closely together. Because when you think about our systems, we have so many competitors at every layer of the AI stack. Multiple chip companies, multiple hyperscalers, multiple AI models, multiple application layers. So when we bring that to another country, they can switch from one to the other. Whereas our competitor brings a package. Huawei goes in, and do you want to be digitized? Great, we'll do it for you, sometimes as a service. But you got a lock-in, and you don't have any autonomy. So I just want to appeal to the fact that we have to stay together. We have to be together. We're in a systems competition, And we need to give agency and empowerment as part of when we bring that technology to others. And we need to make sure that our technology and the underpinning energy that we have can empower the autonomous systems so that our deterrence is strong and we can always be thinking about how we've kept that conflict from happening as opposed to actually facing it.
Thank you. And Minister Kono, having been Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Defense, and Minister of Digital Agency, I think you're uniquely qualified to offer some insight into this area too.
Thank you. Our AI investment is second smallest among the G7. Italy is the only country that invests in AI less than Japan. We don't have enough resource in terms of money, in terms of human resource to develop big, LLM in Japan. So I think many Japanese startups are focusing on how to use the existing model for application purpose. But I think we need to develop some kind of national system. Maybe it's commercially not viable, but we need to keep the technology. So I think it would be nice to have a national model, probably financed by the government. I think the strength of Japan in AI field is we have a lot of data in production, manufacturing. If we could feed those physical data into the system at all the manufacturing plants, I think we can develop very strong application in that field. So that's what we should be focusing on. The other issue is our self-defense force has not been able to recruit enough soldiers for last several years. Only 50% of what self-defense force need, we have been able to recruit. So we definitely need to replace human being with AI and robots. The cost of human lives in democratic countries anywhere is very high. So we will eventually have to develop AI soldiers and send them to the front line. US, China are putting a lot of resource in this field, but Japan don't have enough resource to match that. So we have been talking to European countries to apply AI technology in defense or military capability. We are not sure how successful we are going to be, but that's something we really need to look at.
Could I ask a follow-up question from Mr. Minister? I think that's a fascinating piece about that adoption. What could be done to change that, to sort of increase the adoption of some of these defense technologies by the Japanese? Is it a cultural issue? Is it a legal change? Is it something else that would expedite that? Because it's a serious problem in the United States as well. I don't think we really have any lessons to teach about how to do it right, to be honest.
Well, for defense industry in Japan, only customer so far has been self-defense force of Japan, because the government policy banned any export of weapon system or defense technology to other countries. And so defense industry is either small part of a big corporation like Mitsubishi Heavy Industry or IHI. Defense-related revenue is less than 10% of Mitsubishi or IHI. So if you talk to CEOs, they don't know what you're talking about. You got to talk to the head of department or very small manufacturing thing in countryside or something. So we are changing the government policy this summer so that defense industry could export weapon system, defense technology to other countries. We are hoping that will encourage them to invest in field of defense-related manufacturing technology software. And we are encouraging them to make partnership with other defense industry in other countries. And I think that'll be the first step to create stronger defense industry and defense technology. It is not the law, it's just a government policy. So with cabinet decision, we can change that policy.
Go ahead, Mark.
I would just say one of the interesting things coming out of the Trump-Takaichi meeting was the co-production of missiles and interceptors, and having us both produce them together from a capacity perspective, from an industrial base. Japan has a very strong manufacturing industry. I think you're going to be seeing AI move much more towards physical AI. You guys have Japan has great history and great strength in robotics. U.S. has great strengths in AI. Marrying those two together, I think, is a great opportunity that we need to be putting more attention towards. And as it relates to partnering, we hope Europe gets a stronger technology base and AI base. We hope Japan does. But if you look at today, there's 11 times more private AI investment in the U.S. than there is in all of Europe. There's as much AI investment in UK as there is in Germany and France together. So we've got great technology, but you guys got great manufacturing in Japan. Let's come together and work on having those more advanced, and not just in the military sense, but in the commercial sense as well. Because another risk we're facing from an economic perspective is, if you look at manufacturing, we used to be the #1 manufacturer in the world in the U.S. Now China's 75% greater. And they have a way of having subsidies and internal competition and excess capacity, and exporting that capacity to achieve market dominance, not just in low-cost areas, but in areas like EVs and batteries and solar. And they're working very hard, investing very hard to take over the semiconductor side. So we need to get our manufacturing act together as much as we need to have technology be a good, strong suit for all of America and our friends.
And if I could just add that I think, everything we're talking about reiterates the importance of prioritizing interoperability. And I know you made that point earlier as well. First of all, by thinking about how we can integrate our technology together in ways that are interoperable, we open up the opportunity to bring in the best of the, maybe the manufacturing and robotics of Japan, and the AI and the sort of the risk-taking and speed that you get from U.S. innovation as well. But also, to emphasize your point about the systems, like, we're in a competition, and in this competition, ability to have scale and mass is really important. So for U.S. and Japan to have not unique systems, but interoperable systems, gives us an edge in that competition. And then, we've done so much at the policy level at this alliance to create more opportunities for us to operate together. There's a new joint command we talked about this morning. But in order for us to be able then to operate on those policy imperatives, we can't go separate technology paths. So there's just really I think, an urgency to keep prioritization of interoperability at the top.
Great, thanks. Moving to culture for just a second. When I work with Silicon Valley companies and Japanese big companies, often how to manage communication is beyond the language. It's, what do you do when you have a conflict? What do you do when you have a disagreement of opinion? Do you raise a disagreement of opinion in front of everybody? Is that going to reduce the harmony of the group? And is that a definite something you shouldn't do? Or is it okay to put up disagreement in front of everybody because it then strengthens everybody's ideas and it can be healthy? Which is it? Often Silicon Valley and Japan are on opposite ends of this, and this can cause problems. What I'm about to say is that I think it's useful, especially for Q&A, which we'll go to in about 5 minutes, if you have things that you agree with, but also if you disagree disagree with any of our views, because we do have some tensions among the different views expressed. So, for example, it's good that we're overall optimistic. What are some reasons to not be optimistic? In the U.S.-Japan relationship, if we notice the Trump tariffs and then the investment that Japan has committed, $550 billion, it's roughly the expenditure of an annual government expenditure in Japan. This is a lot. Is this what you do to friends? Because it was about if you don't pay up, we're going to raise tariffs further. Oh, but the tariffs are now, you can't do it under AIPA, we'll have different mechanisms. Is this how you treat your best ally? I'm just trying to be provocative. Physical AI, this is a great area of potential collaboration. At the same time, with the Iran situation, all of Japanese manufacturing is basically collateral damage of U.S. policy there, because it's not just oil, but adhesives and all of this can't get through. We're on the precipice of something very bad about to happen to supply chains all over with Asia and the rest of Japan. So is this how this alliance is, where Japan gets a huge amount of collateral damage? Can we work through this? So I'm going to say 5 quick points that I extracted from some of our conversations for optimism, right? So changing manual labor or other kinds of work into something more autonomous, that's dual use at its best. That also hits Japan's social problems. That can also be good for dual use technologies, because as Minister Kono said, there aren't enough people and we need to automate a lot of things. Second, government procurement as a big opportunity, right? And so there's many details on how to do this, because this hasn't happened in the past to the way that innovation has been spurred, but there's a great opportunity, so let's move on it. And Minister Kono's part of the effort to do this. This is great. Third one, startup ecosystem linkages. Right? Japan has a growing and active startup ecosystem, and that's a great place, especially around AI and deep tech and others, where the Silicon Valley ecosystem can link with that. And then fourth is sort of highlighting great stories. Your Matt's story is great. Suzanne points out that highlighting these success stories is also a way to move forward, so that when we picture the alliance and the relationship, there is the shakedown happening, but at the same time, there are all these positive synergies. And then the final one would be, all of this relationship is easier because there is a treaty in place. There is the alliance, and that is something to fall back on. It hasn't been seriously threatened to say, do this or forget the alliance. It hasn't gone to that point. So if that holds, then a lot of this will be easier to build. Now, so that was my middle provocation and summary. You know, in these panels, I always would prefer that panelists ask panelist questions before we open out. I always wonder what panelists have, and we started that a little bit. But for the next 4 minutes, if you have questions for each other, I'd love if you could raise them.
I had a question for you, is how Congress has not been very vocal in, I think, the recent war in the Middle East. Like, what can the U.S. Congress be doing usefully with the U.S.-Japanese alliance, where I think right now it doesn't seem to be doing very much?
I mean, part of the challenge you have in Congress is that ever since I was there, it's become even more, every district is gerrymandered to the extent that you are more worried about your own party's primary than you worry about the general. So if you have a very strong president in your party, their ability, if you disagree with that president, to primary you, and in the House in particular, you're up every 2 years, it makes it very hard for you to step up and oppose whatever your administration is doing. We have an unusual situation we don't have very often of having all seats of power controlled by the Republicans. It more often happens on the Democratic side. And so there's also that sense we don't have this often on the Republican side. They're saying to themselves and not wanting to challenge it. So I think it's really unrealistic to have your own party challenge your own president. What you get mostly is when you get a divided Congress, which we may have again here soon, where the one party can say, hey, if you don't come and play ball, at least on something, the key bills that need to get passed, like appropriation, aren't going to be happening. So I think you can perhaps have more hope in a divided Congress than you can today. And I would say this challenge, we have clearly the most transactional administration in any of our memories. The interesting thing I would tell you to give hope is whoever was the current president, we typically tend to have the next president be the opposite. You know, if we have a goody two-shoes president, we get a little rough and ready president right after that. So I'm hopeful that we're going to be treating our allies better, and I'm hopeful that we're going to be talking to our allies more. And if we're saying we can't do everything, the corollary from that is America needs to collaborate more. And if we can't no longer secure the Hormuz and we need friends, well, then we need to collaborate more. So I'm hopeful that that's part of America's future.
Great, thank you. So let's open this up to questions. We'll take 3. So let's start.
Thank you. To many of us, Prime Minister Takaichi is carrying on the legacy of Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, and she seeks to amend the Japanese constitution. It's been 80 years since the war, 81 years since the war ended, and she would like Japan to be treated as a normal country, and Japan will have a full-size military, self-defense military. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I see, where she's going. Should that happen, will the current administration or the next administration, could be the polar opposite to this administration, be open to that possibility or openly endorse that strategic move? And should that happen, Japan has a full-size military. Should that happen, will the Japanese politicians be thinking, oh, I'm sure there will be nationalistic Japanese politicians who will go, it's been 81 years since the war. Now we have our own full-size military. Maybe it's time for American troops to move out. Maybe at least 50% of American military bases in Japan should go.
Thank you. Glenn.
I'd like to ask Mr. Kono, because with the Takaichi administration, 2 issues that are attracting a lot of attention. One is constitutional revision. The second is nuclear weapons. Those have both been in the news quite a bit. If you could comment on those 2 issues.
Thank you. Third question. Yeah.
This question is also for Kono-san. Biden said 4 times the U.S. will come to defend Taiwan. Trump said never said once. Not only that, he delayed the arms sales to Taiwan. What's your and your colleagues' expectation of Trump's Taiwan policy? Thank you.
Okay, so first part of Cheng-Ed's question, would the U.S. be okay if Japan revises its constitution? Any thoughts on that, real quick?
I'm happy to make a comment from my experience on that, which is, Japan has a very, very capable self-defense force, national security capability, and can do a lot already under the current constitution. And so I think what you'd find in the U.S. government is generally a sense of pushing on an open door, very welcoming to Japan taking on different roles, but also very comfortable with where we are as an alliance and very satisfied with what Japan is able to do already under its existing constitution. And when I was in government, it was always the kind of the mantra was, when Japan is ready, when the Japanese people are ready to change their constitution, that's when it's the right time. And it's not really for the U.S. to push one way or the other. And because it would be, but I think that you could say that within the current atmosphere that's very transactional, it's probably going to be very welcome by the Trump administration.
Thanks. And Minister Kono, there's 3 for you. Would Japan's politicians, if Constitution is revised, would they ask the U.S. to move out? And second, nuclear weapons. Third, Taiwan and Trump.
All right, thank you. Right now, what LDP is proposing is to write about self-defense force in Article 9. And I think the majority of the general public would support that. We have 2/3 majority in lower house, so I think it will go through the lower house, but it will probably vote it down in upper house. We don't have even majority. So the next upper house election, I think LDP would ask people to vote if they would support the change in constitution or not. I think it would be a very good topic. And personally, I believe we should go a bit further. We should adopt, we should say we have right for collective defense. No country can defend the country alone. You need to be part of some kind of institution. And I think Japan should have collective defense and be part of NATO or change US-Japan security treaty for a little bit better way. I think we would continue to host US forces in Japan, but I think we need to regain airspace control. I think we should do that now, regardless of our constitution. I think Japan needs to control our own airspace, and I think it's long overdue. Nuclear, yes. I talked to Mike Waltz the day before President Trump inauguration day, and I was like, asking, whatever happens, the President Trump has to say he will keep the extended deterrence. I don't know if President actually read the joint statement after the first Prime Minister-President dialogue. So if U.S. is unpredictable, more and more voice are coming out of not just from Japan, but Korea as well. Actually, Korea is stronger to adopt a nuclear weapon. Maybe logically speaking, yes. But if Japan goes nuclear, Korea would definitely go nuclear. And then other countries like in the Middle East, Saudi or others would go nuclear. And then the chance of something goes wrong and nuclear explosion going to be much bigger, and it's going to be much, much unsafer world. So I don't think there's an option for Japan to go nuclear. Taiwan, well, I think the strategic ambiguity is necessary, but I think there must be some underlying trust that U.S. would try to defend democratic regime if something threatened them. Without that, it just a simple ambiguity, and it will stabilize the region.
Thank you. Let's go to the next round of questions. From the panel too is okay. We're going to do a psychology test to see how long an uncomfortable silence you can handle. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
I would just say to the question about Taiwan, Trump habitually keeps all his options open and doesn't make commitments, which keeps his uncertainty, which he views, I believe, as giving him better negotiating. So you should not read too much into him not being definitive about Taiwan. I think you can also look at who did he appoint as the Undersecretary for Policy, who has been quite strong on this matter and saying we need to marshal all our forces and have Pacific first, and has been meeting with many of the allies and getting greater commitments from them as to what they would do in a Taiwan situation. So I wouldn't just read the reluctance of Trump to make a strong statement on Taiwan as a change in U.S. policy in our approach towards that. And yes, we are committed to strategic ambiguity. And so, if anything, Biden's statements were more out of line with U.S. policy on this over the years than Trump's were.
Great. Any other questions? I have one from Minister Kono, another very easy one, because it's easy times. So an alliance is usually an alliance against something, right? Something or someone. And so the U.S.-Japan alliance, well, one of the focal points is against rising threat of China, and that's what it's useful for at the moment. But at the same time, until a couple of years ago, China was Japan's biggest trading partner until that was superseded by the U.S. A bit of decoupling happened. So how should Japan, given its alliance with the U.S., manage its relationship with China, especially with the economic chokehold that China does have on rare earths and minerals and things like this?
Yes. When we invited China into WTO, they have different political system, but if they become a good team player, it will benefit everybody. It will benefit global economy. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way. And now Xi Jinping, he is sending Coast Guard gunboat around Senkaku Island every day. And our air self-defense force has to scramble against Chinese aircraft every day. So the security threat coming.
You can't make this up. This is great. Yeah.
States in East Asia for that. Well, we need to be prepared for post-Xi Jinping era. We are hoping China after Xi Jinping would be coming back to pre-Xi era, and we may be able to create a better economic relationship. Now, China use rare earth or some material to make medicines. And we really need to strengthen our economic security in those fields.
Great. Thank you. There's a point of humor because you dropped off on this end very briefly while talking about China. And of course, we don't believe in conspiracy theories, but it's a very fascinating coincidence. We have just a few minutes left. Maybe if you don't have any other pressing questions, we can go through the panelists and you can offer last comments. We have about a minute each. So the future of the U.S.-Japan alliance, optimism, but being realistic about the challenges. Anything you'd like to finish on? Maybe start with Suzanne.
I just can't help it. I have to react to the earlier question that you just had about, made it sound as if China was something new for the U.S.-Japan alliance. But I've been involved in the U.S.-Japan alliance since the late 90s and very actively since the early 2000s, and I've always felt it's been about China. So it may not have been explicit, but I feel like that's very much always been there. But if these are closing remarks, I do always want to go back to the foundational level of what is happening. I generally try not to worry about the turbulence that's happening at the top because, as I said, there's so many common strategic objectives that can absorb that turbulence. But where we really need to pay our attention, and when we have a group of actors like the G1's group, we need to be thinking about that people-to-people level and the foundational level and investing in that relationship for the long-term stability and health.
I'll maintain my optimism, but we are needing to move not just in interoperability, but co-creation. And I think that's what we really ought to be in this system competition that we're in right now, because we're within the same system, the same team. One thing we haven't talked really a lot about was the supply chain aspects of this and the economic security, and how U.S. and Japan, again, should be in lockstep as we make sure that there aren't chokeholds like rare earths that can be inflicted on us, and that we address them preemptively as well as the time we're addressing rare earths.
I have maybe an unconventional view here. Is we're living through a time of tremendous instability, chaos, and uncertainty. And it's very easy to look at this and say, this is a huge problem. I see a big opportunity in this. We are living in an international system since the end of World War II that is 81 years old, and nothing succeeds and continues for 81 years when you have a huge amount of change. And policy doesn't change on its own. Policy changes in lumpy ways when there is a shock to the system to force it. So I think what we should do is think about what are the opportunities we can to have much needed updating of what we have right now. And the U.S.-Japanese relationship has a lot to build on, but it's not something that can stay static. So let's take advantage of this and see what assumptions need to be changed for where we can evolve this in the future.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's a great positive note to end on. And I think you have a lot to bring home with you as you think. Most of us are a business audience. And so as we think of our business, these are the bigger picture issues that will affect a lot of the trajectories of what we're working on. So please join me in thanking the wonderful panelists for the wonderful panel.